Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio inside Max 6 Workspace and the Conscious Capitalism Arizona headquarters in Tempe, Arizona, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm your host and Phoenix Business Studio owner, Karen Nowicki. Gosh, we've got this is segment number 2 on a very important topic. Before I introduce our guests, I want to just have you pause, our listeners, for just a moment and think about the people in your life, either close family or friends, coworkers, neighbors, and think about the stress that you've witnessed people go through. Think about the trauma that either is seen or unseen. And think about your own personal life and how you deal with those things as well. Our conversation today is around the topic of trauma, mental wellness, and suicide prevention. And the guests and folks that we have gathered today for this second segment are folks who can really help us through a different lens, see what's going on in the world of mental wellness and sometimes mental illness. So some of us have personal experiences, myself included, and we'll talk about that when we get into meat of the conversation. But we really want to ask you to be present in this conversation as you listen to this, either live broadcast or podcast, and be listening from a lens of what action can I take to be in better service to myself first and then to others. And if we don't provide some of those answers, we'd love to hear from you afterwards so we can keep this conversation going. Also, if you know somebody who is an expert or has a story to share in each of those subjects, we would love to hear from them as well, because we're going to continue this conversation and we'd love for you to be a part of it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Susan Todd. She's with us via Skype, I believe from California, and Susan is with Movember, and she is the U.S. Director for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. Welcome, Susan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate this.
Well, we are really honored and thrilled to have you here. And we'll have you start off with us in just a moment. But let me make sure I have a chance to introduce everybody else in the studio. And Nikki, I'm going to mess up your last name.
It's okay. It's Kontz.
Kontz. I kind of sort of remember that from the last time you were on with us. Nikki is with Teen Lifeline.
Yes.
And she was a guest with us on 3C Amplified with Jacqueline Disrems. Last year, I think we...
Right.
And somebody else was on with you for that segment. Do you recall?
I'm Facebook friends with them.
Okay,
I'd
good.
have to look it up,
yeah.
yes.
Well, as soon as you came into the studio today, I knew that we had connected, and I hadn't made that connection earlier. So, Nikki Kontz, thank you for being here. And Ben and Denise Denslow, I can't botch that up too much, can I? Very good. And they are with the JEM Foundation. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. So, right, I've already set the tone for our conversation. Like with all of our Phoenix Business Radio segments, we really like to just trust our intuition and see where this conversation goes. We always believe that that's the best way to have candid conversations. And that's the whole point of this, right? We've made mental illness, we've made suicide such a taboo thing that nobody is talking about it. And when we do talk about it, we put such heavy guardrails around it. I'm not really sure why. Maybe some of you know. And we still make it tough and crunchy and uncomfortable. I get it. I get it firsthand. So with that, Susan, tell us a little bit about yourself and Movember and really who you are here to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Movember actually is an international charity. It started originally in Australia in 2003. And how it started was 2 guys sitting around at a bar saying, we want to do more, we want to give back, we want to raise awareness about men's health, sort of recognizing it's not something that is often talked about. And so from that conversation, sort of started this challenge of men growing mustaches in the month of November and using it as an opportunity to have a conversation. And so the focus of the foundation is to raise money and donate towards causes that are focused in 3 areas. So it's prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and then mental health and suicide prevention. And so we've been focusing on mental health and suicide prevention in the U.S. since 2014 and really take a prevention and early intervention lens, and also want to focus on sort of a gendered lens as well, of saying how do men interact with health systems? How do men talk about health? How do we design programs that work for men? Because unfortunate reality is that men, on average sort of die 6 years earlier than women. And then if you're looking at some of the suicide rates in the US, approximately 75% of all people who take their own lives are male. And so recognizing that we need to really focus on how do we really change these numbers? How do we look at what is a personalized approach? And not saying that, women aren't important or communities aren't important, but saying, we know that historically certain things aren't working. So how do we start to change things, open up conversation, open up dialogue, and look at things kind of in a little bit different way, but just really recognizing that this is an issue that needs a lot of help, a lot of attention from so many different people and so many different angles.
Excellent introduction. And let's have the two of you tell us a little about JEM Foundation and who you are and how you're serving the community.
We started the JEM Foundation 2016, so 2017, so it's been just over 2 years. Unfortunately, January 11th of 2016, we lost our son, Jacob, to suicide. We had tried for years to actually get him help, and unfortunately, we were not able to get him the appropriate help. So after we lost Jake, I was saying that we have to do something so no other family goes through this. And my husband's like, start writing your legislators, start, just seeing if you can get a conversation around mental health and suicide. We had noticed that New York had implemented a law in 2006 called Timothy's Law that stated that mental health had to be basically equal with physical health. So we really started trying to get a Timothy's Law enacted in Arizona. And then we found out that there was already a federal parity law that was enacted in 2008 that states you have to provide, if an insurance company is providing behavioral health, it has to be equal with physical health. So we really started focusing on parity. And then we realized with suicide prevention that an entire family is affected. So we started the JEM Foundation. And our purpose is really around youth suicide. We know that there are a lot of different age groups that are being affected. We know senior citizens are at the highest, but for us, because our son was only 15, that's really kind of where we were led, is to help youth suicide. But we realized that when a youth is in crisis, a parent or a caregiver is also in crisis. So we really tried to provide support for the teen as well as for the parents or caregivers of the child. We also really do a lot around suicide prevention with training for youth mental health first aid, making people aware, trying to remove the stigma. And you had brought up, why this is still such a crunchy subject. And I think for some people, even if they don't realize it, I think there might be an inherent bias that they're not aware of. And so talking about it might make people aware of it. So we really try to focus on training, individual and family support, and just making our communities a better place, and try to reduce and end youth suicide.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Ben?
Well, I'm glad we're having the conversation. I refer back that I graduated from Corona del Sol in Tempe back in the 80s, and we lost a fellow student, a female actually, to suicide, and there was no discussion around it. We weren't told by the teachers. It was, a friend told a friend about it. And I found out recently that 2 teachers knew of her intentions. 2 of her friends' parents knew of her intentions. Nobody said a word.
I can relate to that. We'll talk about my personal story in a bit, but I can so relate to that. And a lot of folks, to your point, don't really know what to do with it, and let alone how to manage and navigate their own emotions without trying to, insert themselves into somebody else's. Right. I wonder, can I ask when you graduated from Corona? I'm a McClintock graduate from 83. Maybe you just look familiar from way back then, but I'm a little older.
87.
Dude.
Sorry.
Doug, do you know Doug Schultz?
I do.
My brother.
I remember him.
Yeah, my younger brother. I was, as you walked in, I recognized you as well. I'm like, I know you from somewhere. So I'm a McClintock grad, but again, a wee bit older.
That's right.
So we might just be running in that same East Valley circle. Well, Denise, thank you for the introduction to JEM Foundation and for doing the work that you guys do. It's so needed. And before we came on air, I said, this might likely be an emotional conversation for all of us today. And yet we need it to be. We need to continue to wear our hearts on our sleeve so that it continues to be this driving force for us to help impact positively folks who have not made that choice yet. All right, Nikki, tell us about you and Teen Lifeline.
Okay.
I'm the clinical director for Teen Lifeline. I also serve as the board president for the Arizona State Suicide Prevention Coalition. And really, my story got started when I was 15. And I actually lost my best friend to suicide. And I was kind of that kid who we all kind of know that wanted to help all my friends and I wanted to save the world. But I had this amazing teacher who recognized the pain that I was going through after losing him, and that what I was trying to do kind of for my friends, and recognized I needed some help. And so actually geared me towards Teen Lifeline. So I've been with Teen Lifeline for 25 years, and I started that because I lost one of my closest friends. It was my passion. It drove me. From there, I decided that social work was my world. I'm a licensed social worker, but even more than that, it geared me towards teens and crisis. And crisis is such a scary place for people. But it was the one place that I realized in all of my education that there was such immense possibility for change. And when we talk about families, it's that moment where you sometimes, or for someone in crisis, can go, if I can find the hope, I can find the drive. But when we're talking about suicide, it's hard to find that hope, and it's hard to find that help. I love working with teenagers. I've worked with other age groups. They're just my jam. And I love them. But it is that place also of there's so much that the working with kids in the way that we do. It's about also helping them to find that hope. And I think, like what Denise said, it's really about fostering those communities. It's the fact that our communities don't know what to do when our people hurt. And so it's easier to kind of put our hands up to it than it is to kind of just even ask the question, are you okay? The power of that question.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to guess, I know in my experience, and I'm going to look to Denise and Ben to ask this question. You said that you had tried to get your son the help for a long time. Likewise, I tried to get my husband help for a long time. And I asked the question, are you okay? Many times.
But not knowing what to do after that.
And not knowing what to do after that. And he was 15, am I right? Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, remind me of his name. Jacob. So Jacob was 15. At 15, as a parent, you still get to say, this is what we're doing, not without probably a fight at times, I'm guessing, when it's a 50-year-old man.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, listen, I'm concerned. At least Mike's issues were manifesting as physical issues. I had no idea that he was contemplating suicide, and he survived. So October 28th of this last year, just a short 13 weeks ago, my husband attempted to take his life and survived miraculously, on top of likely whatever was going on beforehand that brought him to that decision. We have a traumatic brain injury on top of it. And so for me, this is an incredible conversation because this is new landscape for me. Carrie-Anna Blanchard, who's a big advocate in the East Valley schools, is a neighbor, a friend of mine, and was one of Mike's customers. He owned an auto shop. And we had her on our first segment. She'll be speaking with you guys at our event coming up next week on Thursday. I didn't know what questions to ask, even though I've spoken on behalf of suicide before around just mental wellness and taking care of yourself. I have so many questions that I'm just left kind of reeling. I feel like it's different to have someone who survived it, because now we're navigating how do we keep that person here, and how do we help them get the help that they need, right?
And want to stay alive.
And want to stay alive.
And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough is, I know we focus a lot on those that we've lost, and we need to do that. But we don't talk about those that survive and the issues that they have after, and the help that they need. And I know that's a conversation that a lot of people are not having. And I think we really need to be there for the people, like you said, keep them alive, but also how do we help them? Because we don't talk about the traumatic brain injuries or the injuries that sustain after the attempt when they survive.
And the trauma for the family. You now have experienced that trauma. And when we talk about that stigma and how do we get past that, honestly, when it comes to especially the adult populations and for parents and trying to get help for their kids, it really is the parity. Because if we can recognize as a society that if we were diabetic, we would do what we needed to do.
Absolutely.
We need to do that. So we have to have equal treatment. There's definitely another obstacle to that is that we don't have enough behavioral health professionals to meet it. So
I am just now navigating this course, and it is absurd to me.
The waiting list.
So,
it is because there's not enough of us.
No, and people have been
really
apologetic on the other end of the phone, saying we're so sorry, but you can't get in to see the psychiatrist until May or June. That's the earliest they have any new patient spots. And I'm like, we need medication yesterday. It's fascinating.
And that's where the crisis system comes in, which is, for us, we're doing it with the kids. We run the crisis hotline. But the adult system has that as well. But it's oftentimes that we can try to help families to access services differently sometimes.
Right. And handing us a bunch of brochures doesn't help. I can tell you that I went through a situation with my oldest son when he was going through a crisis, and we ended up in the ER, and it was a psych eval. And after doing the blood pressure and the heart monitor, and hey, can we do an EKG just to make sure that there isn't something physically going on? We're going to send in the social worker. And they're going to, what they were calling a psych eval. And as mom, I'm sitting here with my then 21-year-old son and thinking, finally, we're going to have somebody kind of help get us in the right direction. The guy walked in. This is just one experience. So I'm not making all social workers or all hospital situations a negative thing. But he walked in and he was I think he was trying to be, just play the buddy card, and was talking about his own stepson and issues that they have. And like 2 minutes into this conversation, I'm thinking, you're not helping this. You're not asking the right set of questions. Mm-mm. My son by then had I think he was more trying to be impressive and show that he was okay, because it was traumatic to be there and ask for help. And so he quickly realized, if I just don't show that card, they're going to let me go home, right? And so this guy didn't pick up on that. Mm-hmm. And again, my son's an adult. And after a couple minutes, he's like, so yeah, you seem like you're okay. Hey, here's a brochure. And there's like 7 pages of, not a brochure, but 7 pages printed out of all these phone numbers and resources. And I mentioned before we got on air today that we had Mesa Community Court on with us yesterday. It was Jacqueline DeStrem's show, 3C Amplified, and they're talking about having a navigator available. I really feel like in our health system, some of them are now health advocates, the nurses, when it comes to cancers and some of those health issues. You have someone who knows the system and can help you navigate through it. I think we need this with mental health.
Well, and I think another thing that people are not aware of, and this is something we're trying to address in our parity legislation, and when I say the words parity, I mean equality.
I was just going to ask you to please define parity. You both have mentioned a couple times. I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, it's equality. So it's a really simple concept. It's basically just stating that behavioral health care should be no more restrictive and should be equal to the coverage that you're receiving on the physical health side. So when you say parity, I know a lot of people I have no idea what that means. Just think equality, behavioral health equality. Mm-hmm. And I know my son had been in the ER. Thankfully, we were able to get him a bed within 24 hours on his first attempt. Well, I shouldn't say attempt, but first suicidal ideation issue. And a lot of people go into the ER. Most of our ERs are not equipped. They don't have social workers, or if they do, they're not equipped in suicide prevention or any kind of training. They don't have psychologists. They don't have psychiatrists that go in to actually do evaluations or trained in the proper evaluations. Mm-hmm. And they will sit in the ER sometimes for weeks. Now, the problem is, yes, they're in a hospital room. They're being fed, but they're receiving no care, behavioral health care, while they're in the hospital. So as they're waiting for a bed to open up in a facility, they're getting absolutely no treatment.
Which is making it even harder to reach them when they're critical. Same thing with Mike's situation. Yeah. He was in TQ for 4 weeks. And granted, at that time, the trauma team had to focus on shoulders up to head, right? Take care of the gunshot wound. I get it. But every day I was there to listen to the rounds. And every day I kept talking about these other health issues because I was looking at his body to make sure and scan that everything was okay. They were not equipped. And then when he was released to a post-acute care facility for speech, OT, and physical therapy, They were not equipped. They were not equipped for brain trauma, and they were not equipped for mental illness.
Well, and just
mental health support.
Yeah,
Yes.
period. And two things that I think a lot of other people are not aware of. The first, behavioral health providers are reimbursed from the insurance companies at far less than physical doctors are.
Mhm.
So when you have a behavioral health provider that is submitting their rate to an insurance company, they are reimbursed usually at about 81 or 82% of what a family doctor or a specialist will be reimbursed at. So a lot more providers are actually choosing not to accept insurance. And then you also have the issue of they're having to go through all of this, submitting all these codes and insurance codes. And if they get them wrong, then they have to resubmit. And most of the time, counselors are one-person show. So they don't have other people helping them. So we have that issue that we have to address. But then we have the other issue. And actually, I just lost my train of thought for a moment.
Well, with the mental health care providers not accepting the insurance, that's why you're on a waiting list to go see somebody. 41% of Arizonans
Over
are
41%,
going over 41% are going out of network to get mental health care.
Yeah.
And so you're not,
And
you're
you
paying
think
for,
about that bill weekly,
Yeah.
bi-weekly
Yes.
for some who are in crisis.
Yeah.
on top
and
of
that's-
on top of the insurance you're already paying for. So in some respects, it's a consumer issue too, because you're paying for the service that it's not being provided to you.
And it's not going towards your deductible.
Right.
Exactly.
Our insurance didn't cover any of Mike's trauma.
Yeah.
None of it. We now have better health insurance. I didn't realize the policy that we had was just, they call it major medical.
Oh, yes.
And on the website, after the fact, 2 weeks into being in trauma intensive care unit, thinking, oh my gosh, this road that we have ahead and this, immediacy of the brain surgery and the tracheotomy and the feeding tube and all that support to keep him alive. What's that going to look like? So I looked up on the website and it clearly stated, I think bullet number 3 would not cover suicide or suicide prevention. Now, fortunately, with the Affordable Health Care Act coming January 1, I was at least within my right mind to talk to somebody and say, listen, as a small business owner, both of us were, am I within the range to take advantage and switch insurance? And I was just going to switch it for my 12-year-old and I. And she's like, oh, no, there is no pre-existing condition. You put Mike on there as well. And thank God, because now, even though there's wait lists and having to try to find, decent care providers, at least it's going toward a deductible and very quickly it's going to, there's going to be full coverage.
Yeah, and every health plan in the marketplace has to have parity. They
Right.
have to provide mental health at an equal rate of physical health.
Is that currently?
Yes.
It is currently that way. So
yes.
There may be, we're worried about protections possibly being removed, but as of right now, it is that way, yes.
Okay. And Susan, jump in anytime. I want to make sure that you feel like you can just, interrupt us. You don't get the benefit of sign language or waving and nodding at each other. Anything that you'd like to add at this point in our conversation?
No, it's just been a really great, really engaging conversation, and everything, is completely on point of kind of the need for our healthcare system to be more responsive, to have those health navigators and those advocates. I think the reality is that each person who enters into a healthcare facility for a physical or mental health situation almost needs a patient advocate for them. And so we don't have that in our system already built in, but how can friends and families get the education? But the reality is that our system is really complicated to navigate. And so you're managing all of these different situations, and it's really challenging.
And in crisis for yourself, right?
It is.
So
absolutely.
I mentioned I've got a 12-year-old at home. I'm running a business. I thank God for Kendra Maples, who's our studio ambassador and producer here. But my life imploded, as I know, obviously yours did as well. And trying to be a full-time parent to a child who's also in trauma and crisis and run a business and in my situation, a full-time care provider now. And navigating the system, having someone who can be an advocate for us would be greatly helpful.
So this is the other interesting thing is navigators do exist in our state
For mental health?
Yes, but only within the Medicare system. So,
well, that's a start. It's a start.
So they do exist. If someone who is listening who needs access to that, I could help them to find a navigator that way. But if you have private insurance, that is where the navigators don't exist. And so you have to go, do I know someone who can help? Where do I find that help in someone who can navigate? And that's honestly what I spent a great deal of time doing for me because of the crisis system and working with kids and even parents call our hotline. It's to help them to navigate and what are the specific words they can use in order to get, but that's helping them to circumvent the system, a system that was built to kind of slow people down. Yep. The other part of
Designed
that is
way.
It is. And the other part, and this is a huge issue, I know for the coalition and for me personally on an ongoing kind of thing, is that idea that most people think that mental health providers and mental health, either be therapists or whoever, social workers, counselors, us in the field, that we are trained on what to do in suicide prevention, suicide intervention, or have any idea what to do with any of that. The fact is the training and the expertise I got on my own. Yeah. I got on my own with my involvement with Teen Lifeline, my own need to do that, but it wasn't offered to me.
And not everybody's going to make that commitment to go out.
It is not mandated. Yeah. It is not mandated part of psychology, of counseling, of social work. It's only now starting to be some level of mandated for teachers.
Right, and that was SB 1468 last year.
Yeah, and that was the first time ever, but we can't even get it in our own profession. And that's hard for me to take because not all social workers are created equal for that fact. Yeah. Is that there's an assumption, just like we all do with kind of our medical doctors, is that we go in and go, fix me. But they don't necessarily have the expertise, and sometimes they don't work well with that population.
Right.
I mean, I don't work with the gerontology population because I work well with kids.
And that's not your passion is with children, just where there'll be another social worker that will have a passion for senior citizens.
Right.
And we spoke with a professor at ASU recently, and we were like, hey, because ASU is trying to do some things around suicide prevention. They've actually implemented some great things. Yeah. And we had asked him, and I know Ben had talked with him and said, hey, do you know about your social work, in your psychology classes, do you offer suicide prevention training? And we knew that the answer was no, but he's like, I'm not sure. And I'm like, go back and check. And he was shocked to learn that there's a lot of the programs don't offer any kind of suicide prevention, which was shocking for us because our thought is like we go in to see a mental health professional. Well, they have the resources needed if my son's dealing with suicidal ideation. And it took us years. I mean, my son had issues from the time he was 2. Like he would have outbursts and he would kick holes in doors. And I would go to our family doctor and I'm like, okay, there's something wrong. Like he's violent outbursts. And if you knew Jake, he was had the biggest heart in the world.
But they'd come out of nowhere.
Yeah, he would just all of a sudden lose it. And he was overly sensitive. And unfortunately, his biological father wasn't overly supportive. He was a very sensitive kid, but he would have violent outbursts. But he had the biggest heart in the world. Like if a kid was being bullied or a kid was, standing in the corner by himself, Jake was always the first, like, no, come here. Let's include you. But he struggled for years. And right before we lost him, we had finally gotten a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but nobody would talk about that before. It's like, well, he's only 2. And I'm like, but he's having issues. And, I find it interesting. I've done a lot of research on this. Therapists and psychiatrists, if you go see a cardiologist, they're going to scan your heart, right? If you go see a nephrologist, they're going to scan your kidneys. So everybody scans, but mental health professionals don't scan the brain. So the very thing that they're saying they treat, they're not scanning.
Well, and insurance won't pay for it.
No.
That won't pay for it. And there's no blood test at this point that is strong enough. And working with our kids, even more so of where, because their brains are still developing and stuff. So that is always what I'm constantly having to talk to people about also is when with our children, we always want to take them to their pediatrician and hope that they know. And it's like, no, make sure that if you're getting psychiatric meds, they're going through a psychiatrist. Make sure that there are these, because our doctors are wonderful and they may treat our kids great, but they don't treat brains every day.
Well, I'm glad you brought up meds because, there are coping techniques that kids can learn and so forth, but, and we are definitely not against meds, but there is a DNA test. It's a cheek swab that everybody who's on any kind of mental health medication needs to take. We didn't know about it with Jake, but we have referred so many families over that said they did that. They found out their child was on the wrong medication, and night and day difference. Their kid is. It's like we have our old child back.
I don't know anything about this. Well, so it's a cheek swab for.
It checks your DNA against the chemical makeups within medication. So the hardest part, the other thing is that with mental health, it's a guessing game.
It sure is.
It is.
The brain is a fascinating unit, right? A fascinating
you
computer.
have a kid, it's changing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you never know that
hormone
it's
levels.
how quickly it's going to change. So that guessing game, it's not like taking aspirin. You know, it's you have to figure out what's this right combination. And more we're getting to this place where we're able to test. Now, how amazing would it be if we could have a blood test for depression or bipolar? Bipolar is so difficult to treat. Then you add in adolescence to the mix, like with all of that. I mean, it's a fascinating thing, but it's also frightening because us that work in the mental health professional, we're humans treating humans in this world that we don't have quite the testing that other doctors have.
When if you look at our diagnostic, we haven't changed since the late 1800s. I mean, the way we're diagnosing mental health has not changed since the late 1800s.
And real quick, Denise mentioned that the doctor's not scanning the brain. That is proven with brain scans. You can see. She can talk to it better than I can, but the actual images show people that there's areas of the brain when they're having struggles and mental illness. It is identifiable by viewing it. So
more research and more time spent there.
Yeah.
I would like for all of us to kind of shift the conversation a little bit around the individual how do we reach the individual who is saying that there's nothing wrong and they don't need help? I don't know if that was the case with Jacob. It was the case with my husband. Again, now even after the sight of this, he's saying everybody keeps telling me there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. And I get that. No one wants to have a label, something's wrong with you. I went through postpartum depression when my older two were first born. And I remember when I was reading the pregnancy books, I would skip over the chapter on postpartum depression because I naively thought that I've got my shit together and I don't need to read that because I've got control over that. That was not the case. I had a lot of difficulty. My kids were 2 years, 10 days apart. And for a good 3.5 year span, I had a lot of mental illness challenges. And medication was an option for a little while, and then therapy and that sort of thing. And it's kind of what led me to do what I do professionally. I had the ability or the mind to say, oh my gosh, I think this is what's happening. I need to get help. Not everybody has that. So can we all speak to that? How do we help?
I think one of the ways, and we think back to, because we now attend the the Survivors of Suicide group. And one of the things that came out of that was, how do you explain suicide to a child? And you tell them, say their brain was sick and they didn't know how to make good choices. And I think that almost needs to be the message out there, that it's okay not to be okay. Your brain is sick and there's nothing wrong with that. You get the flu, your brain can be sick, you can get over it. But, men in general, we're fixers. There's nothing wrong with us. We're the ones doing the fixing. We don't need to be fixed. So we're even harder to reach.
And emotionally, Susan, maybe you can join in here too, as you represent Movember as well. I love the men in my life, and I have a lot of them. I'm Business RadioX. The majority of the people that we interview, business owners, tend to be men. And I have a very close network of friends, baseball dads, and, the folks that are here out in Mac 6. Not everybody is comfortable talking about their feelings other than anger. Well, a lot of the guys that I know do anger really well, but anger can be a mask and for a lot of other things, pain and sadness and woundedness.
I think, I think one of the things that we are seeing, and I think it's sometimes frustrating for the general public, is that, suicide's complicated and no person who is struggling is the same and their problems aren't the same. And it's not ever just one thing. And so when you have all of that, that means there's complicated things and more than one thing that helps someone. What we do know is there is some research in reaching men. You have to use humor. You can't use the normal therapeutic world. There's a great website called mantherapy.org that is awesome for men and teenage boys because of the humor involved. But it really goes back to the point of what I need and what you need to feel better in whatever's going on in our life may be different, and it's going to look different. So we have to stop treating everyone the same. And that's such an important piece of that.
And I couldn't agree more of kind of how you approach it. I think you see how clinically certain things present as well in terms of, we don't talk a lot about it a ton, but anger can actually be anxiety or depression.
Yes.
And clinically, you'll see it listed much more frequently for adolescents than you will for adults. Mm-hmm. But your brain doesn't change that much when you switch from, changing from what's considered a child or adolescent to, a young adult. And so you're kind of missing those opportunities. And, I couldn't agree more with the use of humor and kind of thinking through how do you approach engaging men differently, and speaking to kind of the men like to be those ones that are helping. And one of the projects that we fund and support is out of Canton, Connecticut, and it's working with the National Guard. And what they do is they engage men to actually sort of volunteer and do activities and provide training to middle school kids around being resilient and around certain topics. And so while they are actually being the ones that are helping, they're actually getting that training, they're creating social connections, and they're able to then start to open up and have those conversations. So it's sort of creating situations that men will go do, and then you're slipping in the mental health kind of awareness training conversation. Because men aren't necessarily going to sit down across from a table and talk to each other. But if they're, building a shed or fixing a motorcycle or doing an activity, you can sometimes get people to then open up in ways that they don't, sort of normally do. And I couldn't agree more that suicide is complex. And there's a component of social connections that I don't think we've had some research on, but I don't think we quite understand enough of how that plays into kind of suicide and suicide prevention, and really thinking through how do we approach this from so many different angles and recognizing it is quite the complex issue.
And social connection, would we say that the polar opposite of that is isolation?
Not always. Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a feeling of isolation. That's a lot of times what we see with our kids, especially. It's a perception.
Right. So you can still be in a room of a bunch of kids at a dance or in a classroom or on the baseball field.
And even adults can feel that.
Of course.
It's
workplace, family. Yeah.
Sometimes it's that perception of isolation. And I think a lot of times when we talk about that reaching out and making sure that we're supportive communities, it's not just about reminding someone. And I think what Susan just said, that parallel play can sometimes be so important. What we would do in like play therapy is like with guys, sometimes it's better that we're doing something next to each other, not looking at each other, which can be such an important piece of that. But, the other part is that not for everyone, therapy isn't going to be the best thing for everyone. It's going to be a lot of different things. And so making sure that we are spending that time with our loved ones, trying to experience, we know our loved ones. How do they function better? How do they function well? There's other aspects of that fostering supportive communities that we don't have enough research about, and I just kind of lost part of my train of thought. But it is about educating community members as well and how to support. The other thing that came out of the CDC last year is something that kind of blew our minds away.
Who's the CDC?
The Center for Disease Control. The research that came out of there is that we thought that 90% of suicides or more were related to mental health. What they came out with last year is that 50% are related. The other 50% roughly have to do with people that are in crisis and don't know how to escape it. And so it's not that it's impulsive, but it's that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And that parallel play even can work even with all age groups, of that idea of when we build those connections, when we have those other types of connections that show support, we're able to also see that there is a feeling of hope and help, and there's other people that can help us in different ways. And I think we have to reiterate that it's not just medication and therapy. There's lots of ways to help people.
Can you throw out some other ideas then? If it's not those two things alone, what else is it?
Well, for our children, it's really building that resiliency, in that as parents, we often want to build a bubble around our kids that they don't hurt. And so we have to be good models about reaching out for help, but we also have to advocate for the larger community. Exactly what the JEM Foundation does is it's about advocating for the fact that we as a community and as a nation need to support each other, be kind, and that we need to have all equity in what we are able to do for our own health, that parents feel supported when they are struggling with their children and when their children are suffering, but adults have that same thing. Imagine if we had parity, if we had that equality in our medical system, would it be easier for someone to talk to their doctor?
And I think, one thing, Tim Warnock, who we fought with last year to get SB 1468 passed, he said something that really stuck with us. He had said, if you have a child in the car, oftentimes your child is going to have a better conversation with you in the car. Because like you said, it's not face-to-face. I know men are much better with this as well.
Put them in the back seat, even better.
And just have a conversation. Yeah, right? So, because they're going to be more comfortable. But
exactly,
if they start opening up, you might be going to the grocery store, you might be taking them to football practice or whatever it is, dance, whatever. Keep driving. If they are opening up, keep driving, because if you stop, you're probably not going to get that back. Everything else can wait. If your child is starting to open up, get in the car and drive, see if they open up and start talking, and listen non-judgmentally. I think that's, as parents, we want to fix it. Or if our kids tell you, I just drank, or I did drugs or something, they're afraid to tell us. And look, we know that's not good. But if our children are struggling, we have to remember, look, we have to listen non-judgmentally and show them, look, we care, we love you, we're here for you, you're not alone.
Not fix it.
And not
just ask questions.
Yes. And understand that, we understand, like, if our kids go through a breakup, right, we understand that they're going to get better. At that moment, our adolescents don't have the brain development or the experience to understand that. So for them, their whole world is ending. And to understand that, not to just go, it's okay, it's going to get better, but really try to talk with them and remember how you felt when you were an adolescent. Your whole world is ending. We know it's not as adults, but we have a perspective that our kids don't. We have years of experience.
And research actually shows that kids that are going through a breakup, what's going on physiologically inside of them is exactly what happens to an adult going through a divorce.
And it's physical.
Yeah,
it is. I remember my heart wanting to jump out of my chest.
I can tell you an example. My now 12-year-old, last year when he was in the 5th grade, he had been at school only for an hour, and the nurse called me and said, hey, he's crying, and he said his heart hurts and his chest hurts and he can't breathe. And I'm thinking, well, what happened this morning, And I thought, well, he didn't wear a warm enough coat. He must be coming down with something. And I said, well, why don't you put him on the phone and let me see how he's doing? And he's crying. And I said, well, do you need me to come get you? And yes, I do. I'm like, okay, well, I'm on my way. I don't live far. I pick him up. And as soon as I got eyeball to eyeball with him, I could sense that it was less physical. It wasn't a cold, but something had happened that was traumatizing for him. And so I didn't say anything in front of the nurse, but I'm like, but, you want to come home and let's just take the day. Yep, I need to come home. And we get out to the car and I said, hey, did something happen this morning that, with your friends or with your teacher? And he looked at me like, basically, how do you know? And I said, and he said, yes, but I didn't want to tell you because I knew you wouldn't come if it was something like that. And I said, well, what is it? And we got in the car, and he had a little girl that he was friends with, and they were, going together, whatever that means, in the 5th grade. And she had broken up with him. And because he didn't have a cell phone, it had all happened without him, so he doesn't hear about this until somebody else tells him when he gets to school, right? I mean, this is a real, and he literally, his heart split wide open. He was heartbroken, and I just let him talk. And I thought, okay, I have to be very protective of this because I was an assistant principal and a 3rd grade teacher for years. And my thought was, hell no, I'm not going to pick you up from school if you're having social issues. But if it's the same physical reaction that we have, it's real. And it's traumatic. And thank goodness that he called. And I just said, listen, you're experiencing a broken heart. This is what a broken heart feels like. And I am so sorry you're hurting this way. And then he says, of course, if I had a cell phone, it wouldn't have happened. I don't know that I agree with that. He now has a cell phone, but the point is, I was never a 12-year-old boy.
Right.
I've only done Karen Nowicki. I was Karen Schultz before that, and Karen Douglas in between. So I've only done me. And I feel like I'm fairly educated. I was an educator. I'm an integrative coach professional. That still doesn't mean I have all the answers. I don't even have them for me, let alone my kiddos and or my spouse and my friends. But being willing to admit that, I think, is part of it.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about school. So much of the stuff happens at school. And that's why we fought really hard for the Mitch Warnock Act, the SB 1468, because our teachers during the school year spend more time with our kids than we do. They see the interactions with their friends. They can tell probably before we can as parents if there's something wrong. So that's why that's really important. And that's why, Denise and I got trained as youth mental health first aid trainers. We just trained 28 teachers that will now have, that's 28 more people watching out for our kids. But the next step to that is, okay, now we've got eyes on these. We've got to get these kids help. And that's why the parity bill that hopefully will drop any time now is going to be so important, because that's going to help us get, funding for more, healthcare professionals and get that help. So these kids aren't sitting in a hospital for 3 weeks with no help.
How can we help you get that bill passed? What do we need to do as a community and citizens? Like, how do we rally around that?
Two things. Well, Monday, we're actually going to be going to AFSP's rally. They're doing a rally at the Capitol. So they're doing their day at the Capitol, which if you have registered for, that's great. You're going to talk to your representatives. But there's going to be a rally, I believe, from 10 to 11 a.m. That people can come down just in support of mental health.
Monday, February 3rd.
At the Capitol. Okay. So we're going to speak for a few minutes. Our bill sponsor is going to speak for a few minutes. And it's just about, hey, we care about mental health. We care about suicide prevention. So if, more people that are there, I think it will show the legislators that, hey, the community really does care about this. But then once the bill drops, if they want to follow our Facebook page, it's JEM Foundation. We'll put the bill. We're going to have a fact sheet that's going to come out with it, a press release. And I would just say, contact your legislators and say, look, this is really important to us. And there's a lot of really great things in the bill. And I wish we could go into detail. We can't because the bill hasn't dropped yet. But the governor did release that they're doing a suicide mortality review team. That's a part of this. So everybody that dies by suicide within 5 days, excluding weekends, they're going to have access to records. So we can start really looking at, hey, what happened? What went wrong? Why were we not able to get this person help?
And that does exist for children already. And it has the child fatality review team, but it hasn't for all ages.
And they don't have access to it within 5 days, though. That's the issue with the child fatality review team. Oftentimes they don't get it for almost a year. So this way they'll have access to it.
And that's coming from police records. I mean, you're not going to the family.
Everything.
It's everything. So it's everything that you can get. So it's also as willing as people give it fast. But it's police records, medical records, family interviews that may have come from the police, school records, anything that's possible, but also the same thing. So that we can look at, when's the last time they went to the doctor? Did they have a counseling appointment that same day? When's the last time? A multitude of different things that allows us to kind of look at that.
And we can discuss that just because the governor already released that part of it.
Yeah, well, we'll have you back on when we need more information.
Yeah, we're really excited. We were in the meeting with the insurance industry, actually. And I have to say, they've actually been really great coming to the table through this whole thing. So we've been really grateful that the insurance industry has come forward with the bill, and we've had a lot of meetings with them. But our sponsor, Senator Brophy McGee, actually looked at us and said, can we call it Jake's Law? And I start sobbing in the insurance industry meeting. He actually gets teary-eyed.
First time I teared up at the Capitol with all these meetings.
But it was just, we had never dreamed that, we had no expectations. And when she asked us that, it meant so much to us. And
it's so important.
Yeah. I actually we have a really good friend, Carly Fleege, that's been just phenomenal. She's been a volunteer lobbyist for us. We're so small, we don't have any kind of funds for a lobbyist.
Just Denise and I.
Yeah. And she's been phenomenal through this. And she lost her sister. And I was like, like, I wish it could be Jake and Carlene's Law, because she's been so instrumental in this as well. So we have a phenomenal coalition. My kid, AZ Psych Society, American Psych Society has been huge helping us. Mental Health America of Arizona has been phenomenal. We're really glad that AFSP has chosen to support this bill. And our sponsor, of course, Senator Brophy McGee. And, we also want to just huge shout out to Sean Bowie, because he's got 3 more bills coming out for mental health. He's been phenomenal.
Such great resources, and people on board, and all the work that you've done, just the two of you, all that heavy lifting.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. We're going to round out the segment. This is something that we could talk about, and we will continue to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Please continue to let us know at Business RadioX how we can get the word out.
And I do want to say that if anyone is worried about someone, about a loved one, if they themselves are struggling, there is help. There is hope. Don't give up. And if you're worried about your child or just need to know where to go, don't be afraid to reach out to Teen Lifeline through our hotline, through our website. Whatever you need, we'll be there to help and help navigate whatever we can and help make the connections necessary.
And is there a hotline phone number then?
So
hopefully it's going to be 3 digits very soon.
Pretty soon, except there won't be a teen version. That's the hard part. What we know with kids is they turn to their peers first. They don't like things that adults go to. So unfortunately, that won't be attached right away. But the hotline number is 602-248-8336. The state coalition number, so also can help navigate for those that are adults that are trying to navigate, can call 602-248-8337. And then the website, teenlifeline.org. But anything that we can do, if anyone is just worried, doesn't know the next steps, and again, the issue with the navigation, we can sometimes help alleviate some of those roads, or at least explain the system and how to access it.
And what we tell parents a lot is that the resources aren't just for the kids, it's also for the parents.
It is. And people think that just calling Teen Lifeline, it just has to be the kids or texting. No, it's for parents. We get calls from parents, from educators, because like you said, our teachers spend more time with them than anyone. As a social worker, I didn't get a degree with special glasses that tells me everyone that's hurting. Mm-hmm. People gotta, it is our teachers and our kids that are the gatekeepers to getting those in need of help.
Yeah. And teenlifeline.org is
teenlifeline.org.
Mm-hmm. And JEM Foundation, can you round out the segment for us? What is your a handful of tips in a couple of minutes about what you would do to encourage a parent and or a child, an individual who's hurting, to get help? And then where can we find JEM Foundation?
You can go to gemfoundation.com or .org. It's JEM. And we have a lot of resources on our page. Like I said before, listen non-judgmentally. Don't have that mindset, not my kid, not my child. Suicide, mental health, crisis issues. And it's not always a crisis. It's not always a mental health crisis. It might just be a crisis that they're struggling with. Can happen to anyone. It doesn't discriminate. So if they contact us, if they're struggling with their insurance, we help navigate, filing appeals. We help them understand what their insurance coverage is saying. So we can help them navigate as well if they contact us. And it's just, it's just about noticing, right? It's all about noticing skills. And I tell parents, you are your child's best and oftentimes only advocate. Follow your instincts. You know when something's wrong. And I would say that to spouses as well. Like you just know something's off.
Yep. Don't listen to what they say. Follow your instincts.
Yes, and that's the mistake that I made. I got right in my husband's face and I grabbed his sweet cheeks and I said, listen, I sense that there's something going on. I had enough clues. Please let me know how I can help you. Let me know how you're doing. And he looked at me in the eyes and said, I am fine. And my gut told me differently.
And we do have to remember when it comes to mental health, often what's the scariest part is there's no why. In terms of he's sitting there and he has a loving family, he has a happy life. Why am I so sad? And so how do you tell your loved one when there's nothing to put your finger to it?
Yeah.
So that's why everything's okay, because there's no reason I'm feeling like this.
And I think part of that goes back to stigma. And I think that's where we have to, because if somebody's having a heart attack, they're going to go to the ER, right? They're not going to question it. They're just going to go. And I think we need to get to that point with mental health, that it is okay to not be okay. We have to remove that stigma so people feel free to get that help.
One visual I'd like to leave everybody with is in Phoenix. Well, we have Chase Field, the baseball stadium. In America, every year we lose over 47,000 people. We could fill Chase Field every year with the people we lose, and it doesn't need to be that way.
doesn't need to be that way. JEM Foundation, one more time, how to find you.
.com or .org, and they can call us 480-930-1733.
And JEM.
JEM.
Excuse me, JEM.
Yeah, it was Jacob Edward Machovsky.
Oh, right, of course.
So that's why we got JEM, and then he loved airplanes, so that's why we have the airplane in our logo.
Love it. And Susan, you're awfully quiet. You're still with us?
I am still here. Yeah, it's been a really great conversation. Thank you very much. Yep.
And tell us how we can get a hold of Movember and what you all need from us in order to best support the men in our lives.
Yeah, so we're available at Movember. So it's like the month November, but with an M.com. And, I think the reality is what the JEM Foundation is doing, what Team Healthline is doing. The local on-the-ground community organizations are so important to what, you guys are doing in addressing this issue. I think Movember is focused a lot on communication and media and thinking through kind of that broader communication piece and really looking at addressing stigma. And kind of what we focus on is the ALEC model of ask, listen, encourage action, and check in. And really just encouraging people to think about mental well-being and thinking about taking care of your mental health as you do your physical health. But it's, really grateful to be a part of this conversation and all the work that you guys are doing, Nikki and Ben and Denise and Karen. It's really critical. And just really thank you for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you for all you're doing as well.
Thank you. I really want to personally thank you. I know my colleagues reached out to Movember on behalf of Mike and myself and just said, this is new for all of us. You all have been doing this for a while and at a really big level. For myself and my colleagues, this is new. And I'm grateful, Susan, for Movember doing what you can. Our media still has a huge influence on us.
Yes.
and so whatever we can put out there and encourage towards conversations and asking for help and holding on to hope. I think that's the theme that I'm hearing two things for myself personally. Holding out the hope that if one avenue of addressing this isn't going to work, what's the next thing that we can look for? Because there isn't one fix. There isn't one way to do it. And asking why, I've been asking that a lot. I as a wife and a partner and a best friend and a lover, and a co-parent, I want to know why.
Well, and I would just say you can get better. There is hope. I think that's...
Yeah.
There's effective treatment. It's just about finding what works best
and
for
staying
that person.
the course and believing that we can. And it's folks like you and Movember's movement that will help make a difference and get the word out there. So deeply appreciate it. As we close out, I just want to give a reminder that we are having a mental health awareness and suicide prevention event. This will, after the live broadcast, will of course become a podcast. So if you hear this years from now, you will have missed this opportunity. But we do hope to stay committed to getting the word out and hopefully partnering with you guys to just do whatever we can to support what you're already doing. This particular event will be right here at Mac 6 in Tempe, Arizona, February 6th from 5:30 to 7:30. And along with several of us who are in this conversation today, Julie Gustafson, who's a trauma mentor, will also be with us. And Sheila Hedstrom Pelger, who experienced the loss of her son as well. And I mentioned Carrie Ann Blanchard earlier, who is kind of leading the charge for Parents for Suicide Prevention. So we look forward to having, I know Ben's going to speak with us, and of course Denise is going to be there as well. And do we have Movember? Somebody? Yeah, Nikki, of course, is going to be with us. Movember's not going to be with us. We're hope. What's that? Yeah, it's just excellent. Well, thank you again for a rich and very important conversation. We know that this isn't the answer, but it is a multitude of opportunities for us to remember that there is hope and that we are a community. We need to be here for each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So you've been listening to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Mac 6 and Conscious Capitalism Arizona Business RadioX studio. Some media leans left, some lean right, and we lean business. Until next time, this is Karen Owicki. Thanks for listening.